them that they're not only are they not crazy, but they're not alone. And it's really disheartening to know how many people are witnessing something, whether it's an object in the sky or a personal encounter, some kind of a close encounter, who have this festering in them sometimes for years, if not decades, because they're reluctant to let the cat out of the bag for fear that they will be ridiculed.
Yeah.
And of course, I always remind them who they're talking to. That I can assure you, you're not crazy and you're not alone. That there's a lot of people out there who see what you see. You're not crazy and you're not alone.
Yes. No, that's wonderful that they have that resource in the Washington State MUFON. By the way, if someone out there would like to make a report, do they have to be in the state of Washington? Is that the kind of jurisdiction you like to have those reports reflect? Or
it's the only jurisdiction.
Okay.
Because see, if somebody, there are basically three ways that you can report something, a sighting. You could contact me directly, and a few people do. They'll get the information off of the Facebook site. Or they can call MUFON. If they're uncomfortable doing the online submission report form, they can contact or call MUFON headquarters, and they'll lead them through the process. And then it gets submitted into the case management system. But most people make the reports from the online site, where they fill out all the information. And then it's looked over by someone within MUFON who discerns its level of strangeness. They get what they call a valet classification. So then we know on our end how better to handle this. Is this a close encounter? Is it lights in the sky? Is it an object, something that's moving? So anyway, then the cases that are reported to MUFON National then are forwarded to the state director in the state where it occurred.
Oh, I see.
We handle only Washington cases because that allows us to actually go and visit them, to interview them, to go to the site. There's no way we could go to Florida, but we can go to Vancouver or Ferndale or Everett where you live. So yes, it's only the cases within your own state.
All right. And so, for instance, if someone in another state that's listening to our show tonight has seen something that they find anomalous, they can call or they can go to the MUFON website. Is that right?
That's right. And they make the report, and then at MUFON headquarters, then they forward it to the state where, they could be living in California, but have an event that happened in Colorado. It would go to Colorado. It's not where they're living, but where the event occurred.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. That's amazing coverage. And of course, you have state directors and section state directors in basically every state in the United States, I would imagine, including
That's right.
Hawaii and Alaska even?
That's right. So, yeah, the states are pretty well covered. But if we can get back to some of the material that I covered in this meeting today, because Vancouver is some distance from us, from where I live, I started to do some research on sightings that occurred there, because I figured those people want to know about the sightings that happen in their own area. And I started doing some research and started to come up with some very, very interesting information. And I came up with a newspaper photograph that appeared in 1937 that was printed in the Vancouver News of what appears to be a bulbous-shaped UFO flying over City Hall.
No, kidding.
It's sort of this teardrop thing flying over City Hall. This is 1937. And you could dismiss it as, well, maybe they watched, they were into Buck Rogers or something like that, except then you can turn around and it's a dead ringer to that SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket that went across California December of last year.
Right,
and also there are these like teardrop-shaped phenomenon that have been reported in China and Russia, and they're dead ringers to what appeared over the county courthouse and in Vancouver. So you just have to wonder, how quickly do you debunk that as, well, the photographer clearly fiddled with it, to, maybe he did see something.
So you're saying that down there in Vancouver, Washington, there's an actual photograph that appeared in the newspaper?
Absolutely, 1937 in the Vancouver News.
Oh my goodness!
So but that's not the earliest one. And I actually came up with, I found lots of most interesting stuff in the Tacoma News Ledger from 1893. And Tacoma is about halfway between where I live and Vancouver. So it's like 2 hours north of Vancouver, 2 hours south of where I live. But anyway, it's a newspaper article dated July 3rd, 1893, and the headline is "An Electric Monster: Flashes of light and terrible sounds emitted by something in the bay. W.L. McDonald struck senseless in attempt to rescue a shocked comrade." And they go on to talk about how some kind of strange, electric, monstrous craft came out of the water, basically knocked the two men unconscious, and they fled in terror. And it was seen by a number of people, nobody who was permanently injured, but it's the sort of thing that back then you wouldn't have reported something like that, because basically your reputation would have been destroyed. You would have been the laughing stock. Again, what were you drinking out on the boat? The fact that when they make a report like that, you have to give it at least a second thought to something clearly happened.
Oh, yeah, that is fascinating. So the idea being is that there was some kind, they called it an electric object.
They called it an electric monster because it flashed and it stopped their watches, emitted lights, and made loud sounds and knocked them unconscious. Not only them, but other people that were in their fishing party.
Oh, I see.
And again, to report this to a newspaper suggests that it was so important that they were willing to face the ridicule that would result from it.
Now, was this off in the ocean or the water, or was this on land?
This was at the bottom end of the Puget Sound, right near Tacoma, and it would also be very near Maury Island.
Oh,
where
my goodness.
The famous Maury Island incident happened.
Yes.
And, I'll get into that. I don't know how much time you have, but we can get into that a little bit later.
We got about 25 minutes, just so you know. So we're coming down the home stretch here.
Okay. Well, I guess I can blather along with the best.
Yes, you can.
Anyway, we often think about the Kenneth Arnold sighting on June 24th, 1947, as the first UFO sighting. Right. And indeed, it was the first time it made major media coverage. Kenneth Arnold saw 9 discs flying at great speed over Mount Rainier, and basically it was heading for Mount Adams, too. But anyway, so he reported it. It became international news, and in many ways, we think of the Kenneth Arnold sighting as the beginning of modern ufology.
Yes.
Then what I started digging up is really intriguing, because there was a period of time. He made his sighting. He reported his sighting on June 24th, 1947. Well, the Maury Island incident happened on June 21st. Roswell happened on July 7th. Between the 21st and somewhere shortly after July 7th, there weren't just 1 or 2 or 3 cases of sightings reported. There were actually 583 sightings reported all over the country, but a good share of them In fact, there were 17 sightings that occurred on June 24th, the very day that Kenneth Arnold made his sighting of the 9 skipping saucers. He was not the only one who saw and reported these saucers.
I had no idea, Maureen, that on that very same day that Kenneth Arnold leaves Boise, Idaho in his Piper Cub private airplane and flies around Mount Rainier hunting. Actually, I guess he was hunting for potentially a downed military aircraft that went down the winter before. On that very same day, you're saying that there were other sightings of, were they similar or different UFOs?
Oh, well, I don't know. I haven't been able to get, again, this is a preliminary report on my end. As I was preparing this presentation for this meeting today, I started stumbling across this information thinking, oh my goodness, this is something that I really need to get into because there aren't this is something that's not talked about.
Yes.
And that's, I think, what you'd have to call the first major UFO flap occurred during June and July of 1947, and probably within a 3 or 4 week period in there, with 853 sightings reported nationwide. On July 7th, the same day that Roswell happened, there were 162 other reports.
Oh man, yeah.
And then not only that, and then this information was compiled from newspaper articles and published by a gentleman by the name of Ted Blocher in a book he called Report on the UFO Wave of 1947. Oh. California had 107 reports. Washington had 84 reports. Oregon had 52 reports. Idaho had 43. So there was this whole spate of sightings that were occurring at that time, which gives, to a certain extent, validity to, say, Arnold sightings, Roswell, Maury Island, because they were happening all over the place.
Yes, and it obviously it's not one UFO that is causing all of these sighting reports. I mean, these are multiple events, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And if I can get a hold of that book that I was just mentioning, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going to be able to get a hold of it, but it's it would be just an invaluable resource, to find out, well, just where were these reported and what was being reported. So I was stumbling on this information about how particularly Washington State is really at the forefront of the whole modern ufology phenomenon.
Well, it sounds like it. And then, of course, your predecessor there at MUFON, James Clarkston, did a whole book on a crash retrieval event that happened in on the coast of Washington State as well. I don't know if that was the same time period or not, but
no, that was in the 70s. So that would have been sometime later.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
No, this was at the very beginning of what would be considered modern ufology.
My goodness, yeah, and you're talking 1947 for a period of 8 months, you're saying? These
2 months, less than probably 6 weeks during a 2-month period.
Oh my, 800 and some reports or whatever. That's fascinating stuff. So, you could, Maureen, come up with an entire presentation on just that, the historic UFO reports that happened before Mount Rainier and Roswell, I would imagine. I'm
working on it. That's what I said when I called. Give me a couple of weeks. I'll have something really interesting for the folks. But I just touched on some really interesting stuff that I was able to find out this much information. I have not yet had the time or the resources to actually dig into it deeper. But and then I keep thinking, why didn't I know about this? Why do I never hear about this? I mean, you hear about Kenneth Arnold, you hear about Roswell. I mean, that's about it.
Yeah.
But there was this hundreds of sightings going on. Why is it never talked about?
Well, it's fascinating to me too to have you put that in perspective because our major actually the first sighting that has been attributed to the state of Washington was actually the Maury Island incident that you mentioned, and that was a sighting of, what was it, 5 or 6 donut-shaped UFOs. It wasn't just one UFO that was sighted.